So the time has come to look at the topic of materials. In this scene I've already set up the lighting and the materials. There's two components here. This is to make it look like a building on top of this train, but I'm going to get rid of that for the purposes of this, and I'm going to change the sky so we're in a position where we need to look at the materials again, because they tend to tune the materials to suit the lighting or the lighting to suit the materials. So in this case I'm going to switch to one of the other sky domes. Let's try this Wasteland 3. Add it to the sky. Whoops. Add it to the sky. I'll choose render in scene. I'm going to rotate it round so they've got this bright area there visible. So that's going to be the light source. It's going to need to adjust the lighting up. So let's take the amount of lighting that's available for the ambient lighting, change the saturation so we can get a bit more blue out of the sky, because it's not a very blue sky, and leave it with that intensity at the moment. Let's try 200 so we get some lighting in this. 250. I'm going to re-enable. Am I going to re-enable the sun? Yes, I am. I'm going to re-enable the sun. I'm going to position it there on the horizon. I'm going to have some atmospheric effects. So let's have some haze effect. I'm going to make the haze HLS. So just hold the Alt key down, click on the colour swatch. Let's give it a strong colour there. And I'm going to put the sun in that area there. So that's interesting. It doesn't seem to have updated that swatch. I bet if I go back in it will have done. Yes, it will. So it's probably Camtasia. It does these things to me. Hold Control and Alt and double click on the rollerball, and I can place the sun into the wireframe just by holding Control and Alt and clicking on the area. I can't see the sun at the moment, which might mean it's not switched on as a visible object, so I'll switch that on. Now you can see the sun. I'm going to give it a large amount of horizon illusion, so that increases the size of the visible sun. So I want to create a sunset effect. So I've already got blend with sun, so I can change the haze colour according to what the sun colour is. So if I give it a yellow tint, that'll give it a very strong colour there, and the glow is going to be added to the sky. So in this large glow area I need to make that more of a reddy colour, so I can create like a sunset effect. But as a result it's probably not going to match what I had in mind for the terrain, so that this is what I'm aiming for. And if you can see there's a blue colour there in the middle of these two, which is a sky colour. I can bring that in to the sky by using use sky colour when I'm using add to sky, so that's giving it a blue tint there. So they're just changing things around a bit, partly out of interest, but also because I'm trying to achieve a particular effect. So I'll just give that a quick render. So we've got blue there. This is not very blue here. This effect around the edge. So let's talk about the material. So select the terrain, go into the material editor. This effect here, which you can just see lit up there, is through the ambient channel through altitude, which means that no matter what level I place the terrain in the scene, where it meets the zero line is going to give the illusion of some like water around the outside. So that's already been set up, and you can see that there's been a curvature capture of this height map, so that I used curvature filter. There's another video on that, how to go about correcting the curvature issues, because the curvature is only really responding to the height map resolution, and that in turn you need very high resolution height maps to get a good curvature effect. But even still, they've got this one or two problems with curvature at the moment because of the mesh smoothing issue, so we'll do curvature capture instead. So I'll get away from that and reset this material entirely. So I'll set it to the diffuse grey, and so we've lost this altitude filtering, and we'll gradually reintroduce some effects. So let's see, that's the default grey as things stand, and I guess that's probably looking a bit brighter at that level because of whatever settings we've got with the fog and haze effect now. And you can see the terrain resolution. You can see there's some effect of what's that, erosion effect there, and it's a little bit sharp at the top here. So let's now build our material up so we can create a nice sunset effect. I'm just going to change the ambient colour here just to check that there's nothing else being driven by it. So if I choose high saturation, this horrible purpley, pinky, magenta colour, and just see whether it's affecting anything else in this scene, like maybe the water, I don't know. There's nothing obvious occurring at the moment, so there's a little bit of ambient there in the water material. I can take that out, I'm not really bothered about that. I'll give it full transparency, no reflection, so that's created, it'll be quite a dark water now, but because of the low angle we're viewing at it, that will get more reflection off the water surface, so there'll be no obvious horizon point. The sun, it appears like this, and we're not seeing much of the it's quite a hard transition, we're not seeing much of the glow because it's quite dark. So if I increase the sun colour, it should begin, at least where it's entering this area where it's adding to the HDRI, to lose that very defined edge at the top there, and it'll start to make it look very bright. You can see now we're lighting up on this terrain a bit better, so the lighting's more appropriate. Now, a wider field of view at this point would perhaps help with the sky. I'm only using the low resolution HDRI image to keep the file size down. For final rendering, I always recommend swapping out for the higher resolution version if it's visible in the background, which in this case it is. I imagine that the camera angle, let's have a look at this, is probably going to be, oh, it's quite low, so I'm going to take it up to 120, which is about the maximum you get away with before it starts looking a bit odd. And then we're getting the entire island in this scene, and a bit more of the sky, which is nice. So it's just coming out down here to orangey colour because I'm using blend with the sun with the lighting. I should say this is going to be about materials, but we will get there in the end. I was just analysing the scene's lighting conditions so that I can do something appropriate. So in the material lab, I'll start by putting a blob in for diffuse, and I'll select something for this. So if I hold shift down and click here and go into, well, I've got a lot more categories in here because I've done a lot of experiments with materials and generally doing a lot of stuff with them, but I'll try and pick one that you will have. So we'll go for rocks, and we'll choose this grid rock like so. In fact, what I'll do is I'll now hold the shift key down, control key down, and get 2 channels active. Control, not shift, and shift key for the name, and I'll select another something from here that you might have. Let's have a look. Not sand, not rocks. We've got anything else? I don't know what to choose. I'll go for basic. I want to choose something that's going to be quite high contrast with what I've just introduced, and I'll go for this red fractal. That should be quite contrasty. That's menus hanging around because of Camtasia Studio, so I'll just have to go out and back in again so it gets rid of it. So at the moment, when you've got 2 blobs, they just blend through altitude. So if I hold control key down and click on C now, I can bring in another filter. So I'll hold shift down, and I want a basic slope because that's often a good one for materials. So again, I'm going to have to check right out and go back in because of that hanging around. So you can see as things stand with basic slope, it's applying the rock to the top and this red fractal to the side, which it's not the way around I want it to be. So I can just invert the way that works by going into the deep texture editor. I'm just using the alpha channel to do this filtering, so I don't need colour, and what I want is a reverse of this pattern. Now if I look in the filters, I've got 2 ways of achieving this. So I'll just save this in component 3 for now, but switch back to component 1 and show you one way of achieving this effect. So the other way of achieving this effect is to reverse the action of this filter. So that's one way of doing by adjusting these filter settings as I've just shown you. Another way would be to change this filter to a sine filter. I'll just reset it because it might come in like that for you, and then just wind that up with the B value there, so I've got a full white output. And then if I activate this third component here and drag it over to the second component and then switch the third component, I was just using that to store the component there, and then use subtraction, I could just create an inversion here. So I could go back to modifying this and changing the values if I need to change the way it responds to the slope, which we'll just look at now. So at the moment it's quite a lot is on top, and then there's this small band round the side and this long transition zone between the 2. But if I want to sharpen that transition up, go into the deep texture editor and increase the value here. So it reduces the transitional area, and then I can move that backwards and forwards. So this will be the equivalent of moving it further around the side of that sphere. So if I just want a bit on the top, a short transition zone, and then straight to the other channel, there you go. So if made this red fractal like grass, and we've already got this grid rock effect, then that will be the transition on the material. So if we just have a look at that now, which is not really going to be very appropriate, we can see which bits are going to respond in what ways. So I probably could allow a bit more, we'll call this grass, and something I noticed that Clay Hagebrush uses with quite a lot of his materials was, instead of lighting the edge up, which could give the effect of maybe a bit of a beach, what he'd do is he'd darken the material response here where it was coming down to the water, which always seemed to have a nice effect. So we need to control the diffuse response. We can use an altitude filter on the diffuse. So I'll go back into the material lab and I'll show you how to set that up. So here we've got diffuse, and we've used 3 channels, so we'll use a 4th channel. So just click on channel D. You can't link that up with any of the other channels anyway, so we click on D and that activates this 4th channel. We go to Shift and Basic and get altitude. Check out of that, and now the thing is that we've got the choice of using world space, which means its absolute size is set. So if we scale the terrain, the amount of fading will remain the same, or we can use object space, in which case it's linked to the total height of the object, which in this actual selection is the terrain. Now, as things stand, it's probably going to be a bit difficult to see what's happening here, so we'll temporarily move this control to include ambient and set the ambient up. And if we use alpha scaling, that will mean that if we've got full ambient value, it'll be scaled according to this. You'll notice this has a colour output as well, but we're not going to use that. And we've got white in the ambient, so because this is in the default view, there should be some ambient colour there. We can check that's the case by doing that and just putting it straight under full ambient, so we'll be able to see where this fading occurs. I'll swap it back, and then we'll go into here and just make sure we're getting alpha output. It's got a clip on it, which I don't want, so I'm going to just use none. Oh no, it's got the altitude on it. What was the clip on? Probably on the output. I didn't really pay attention then, and I should have been. So anyway, right, we've got nothing on the output. That's fine, and we've got this altitude filter. If we start putting filters on the output, it's going to modify the alpha output. I'll show you that now, just to be clear why I was thinking along those lines. So if I reset that, you can see that we've got a quantized response. So if we increase the quantization channels, then you can get a stepped response from your filter if you can manage to set these filters up right. They can be a bit fiddly to set up, these filters. I know that, I've used them quite a lot. And so this C value is one of the rare ones where the quantization levels can be controlled by this C value here. So that would produce a quantized output from an altitude, which I wasn't looking for anyway, but I just thought I'd mention it while I was wanting to make sure there's nothing in the output there. And we've just got this altitude filter. We can modify the altitude filter by modifying these values here on A and B, but in this case it's probably easier to use the transformation tools to change its response. So if we lower this value here, we'll get a gentler transition, but it's not the transition is not appearing on this terrain, which means we need to look at this value. So what I'm looking for is a transition close to the water. So if I increase that value there, it's going to compress the transition area, and then use the offset to slide it down to the water surface. So if I just leave this like this for now and bring in, hold the Alt key down, full luminance on the ambient, I can see where my transition is. So I maybe want that to transition, because this is going to be the diffuse response. So there'll be some diffuse response down here, and then it to go to full diffuse as it works its way up. So back into the material app, there's a lot of swapping backwards and forwards, I'm afraid. You do just get used to that though. And then I just change this offset, so we've got a bit of diffuse, then full diffuse. Then if I knock the ambient out of the equation, just use it to control diffuse, that should give me my fading effect. So it's not really very dramatic, so I might want it a bit more dramatic than that. So I can see on the preview here what's happening. So I'll increase the transition of the effect so it's compressing the zone. that it's occurring over, and then I'll have it nearly black at the water surface, but not quite. How much light goes on the water surface will also depend on the total amount of light being provided from the sun and then the rest from the HDRI. So that's set up that fading effect, which still isn't quite what I'm looking for. I want it to be a bit more compressed in its area, so I've made it even more dramatic, and I'll lower it down again to the water surface. That bit of the terrain's underneath. It's a pity these thumbnails are not a bit large, but you know, obviously it all takes time to render. So that's looking really very dark at the water surface now, and we've got this transition. So we'll try that. We'll go for dramatic effect. The materials then, back into looking at these two channels. Obviously I want bump for this, so if I hold the control key down I can have bump response, bring some bump in. I don't want metallicity in this case. So I've got diffuse and bump. I don't think I need any other effect really. Specularity sometimes for rocks which are a hard surface, but it's quite difficult to control the level of response there and whether you want the colour or not. So we'll try it because it can help. You get no specularity from the HDRI, but since we're adding in sun to this view, the sun's not disabled, then we'll get specular effect from glancing angles from this sunlight, and it has got a specular output just there, so it's worth considering. Always make sure you've got 100% on the global shadow intensity, particularly if you're using HDRI effect. So what we got going now is a very high bump effect, and that's creating that, and we're probably getting some specular off this, that not very much. So we'll have to look at these materials. So this grid is grid rocks providing our bump, and if we go into the deep texture editor, we can look at the bump output by just switching the colours off there, and that's the bump output, which isn't really, it's not really working for me. This would be a better bump effect, I think. So I've turned the bump on in there, and probably going to want this at a higher frequency. So if I'm going to try a few of these blend modes between these two channels. So let's try blend max, see what's happening there. Blend V2, just looking at the various effects on the bump to see if we can try adding. That's going to add the colours together as well. Blend slope, that might work, depending which one's going to come first. Usually what's on the left is going to be the more vertical, and that'll probably be this grid pattern. So let's use this third channel again to swap these two components around, and then blend slope that way, and see how that looks now. So check out of that, check out of that, have a look how our bump looks. It doesn't look significantly different, so I might have got my slope working the wrong way around. I thought I got it right there, but I might have forgotten, but I wanted to show you the swap round anyway because it's a useful thing to know, and it's always worth just experimenting with these things. So we'll check out of that and see if we've got that slope better now. So I've got that, I've got the grid effect there, so I was wrong, so yeah. Okay, so let's try increasing this frequency with the scaling. So texture editor there, scale that up so we can make these blocks on this grid rock a bit finer, so it'll not dominate it so much. So there you go, they're still a bit big compared with the rest of this terrain material, but they're getting close to where I'm looking to get them. So back into the transformation tools, I'll take that up to, I don't know, about 900. And the bump effect probably a bit strong, so we'll lower that to 40 and see if that improves matters, because then you can see that it's quite a strong bump, and HDRI lighting does seem to work well with bump. So let's have a look. So I want it to look like a cliff face if possible, although if you find it's not working, then hold the shift key down and we'll have a look for another bumpy material under rocks. This is quite a good one, this purple rocks. I've used that before, so let's give that a whirl. I'll just change that. Oh, object space, I want world space mapping for these, and I want world space mapping for that. So hadn't noticed that before. It doesn't matter with these object space, it does matter with that one. With this one, the slope, it probably doesn't matter. It can be object space, it can be parametric, it can be world space. Just because of the nature of the filter, some filters are not affected by changing the mapping mode. I know it's a lot to take in, but there are plenty of videos that I've done on this, so if you have a look on my either on my YouTube channel or links under my name under YouTube, or there's some on the Bryce mentoring DVD as well that you can find. So you're not wanting for tutorials on materials, but I just particularly wanted to cover what we're going to do on this material here. So this is probably a bit too high frequency for this material. I was just trying it out there. As you can see, the whole process is quite time consuming, and you do well to come up with a good material from scratch in a day, I would say. You can sometimes get lucky and come up with something quite quickly, but it's not always that easy. So in terms of world space mapping, I might have to go right down to a low frequency to get this, so that it's scaled in such a way that we're starting to get something other than just noise out of it. So you want to see that the frequency of the material you're using is a bit smaller, ideally, than the features on the rock, so it makes up for the lack of resolution in the terrain and sort of fills a gap there between the resolution of the terrain height map providing some kind of structure and the pixel level of your final render. Well, that's what I aim for anyway. So at the moment, you see, I can see there's some variation, and this variation in the texture is looking good, and a bit smaller than the variation. You can see the terrain resolution here is creating some spikes, so you know what the sort of resolution the terrain's providing. So that looks okay. I'm thinking maybe it needs a bit more light, but I definitely need to do something about this red fractal material. So let's go for resetting the filter there. If it's going to be greenery, then usually some dark green colours. Let's see what this mode here is. Let's use Interpol 3 so we can get all three colours working. I can't see much action from the green there though. And we've got phase. If you look in the material components and you see phase, try turning the phase down. If it's not doing very much, what we've got here, it's not doing very much, is it? So it's probably no phase, that's okay. But if there was something in there like that, and you got a bit of phase, then you really need to ask yourself whether you need it, because it does tend to slow the render down. So I'm going to set that back at nothing, make sure it's set down to 0, and go back to looking at this. So fractal octaves 2. If we go to multifractal, it'll make it a bit more complex, and it might get some green in there by changing the octaves up. So this octaves is a recombination of your original fractal type at half the frequency. So turning this up will tend to introduce lower and lower frequency elements, and turning it down will tend to increase the frequency. So you can see that's a little bit green there. It's nice and bumpy. We're not using any filtering as yet anyway, so let's introduce another sort of a green colour and maybe more of a yellowy colour there. And then we can do things to, if we use sine for example, we can create sort of our higher frequency components there, and you'll see the other colours coming in. I'm not sure, that green probably looks a bit acidic, so I tend to move the greens away from the blue end of the spectrum, because they do tend to not look right to me anyway. Where I live, the greens are largely brown as well. Things quite dry here on the coast, so that's a sort of a greeny colour. It's got some bump mapping there, and then it's just a question of what sort of frequency to bring that in. So let's have a look how that renders, and I might consider introducing a bit more light. And it's not mixing very much with the rock, because the rock's so steep, so I might consider altering the slope element. So let's do the light first and bring in some more light to light this terrain up, and then we can see what we're doing. So there's a bit more light there. I don't want to go over the top, but I want a bit of light on the scene. And you can see that the rock's looking quite ruggedy, and we might want to mix it with some of this green. So go back into the material lab, go into the slope filter that's mixing these, and here we are, and we can, if we push this transition zone out and move it down, then it should bring more of the green on towards the less steeply sloped areas like here. We can see the fading effect there is making it very dark as it reaches the water surface. It's quite dramatic, and it's just leaving the misting effect, which you might either consider as nice or wrong, your choice. I'm going to stick with it though, because otherwise this video is going to go on forever. I'm just trying to look closely at the frequency of these green areas. The green area doesn't look too bad to me, the colour looks okay. I just need a bit more light on it. I'm trying to decide whether it's going to come from the sun or whether it's going to come from the HDRI. If you want to break the slope up a bit, you can introduce into the slope component some noise. So if we went for fractal, it's a fairly safe choice. I'm going to choose 3D options. I've just moved it across so you can see. So you can see now it's broken up. 3D means just like exists entirely through 3D space. and because it's moved the white across and this white area turned out to be the vertical surface, this should, I think this should mean, or was it this other area? Oh, we'll just have to try it and see. So whether either the green will move across more of the surface or less of the surface. Difficult to tell. It should have randomized its transition though, that's the point. The other thing to consider though is the frequency of this component, because obviously the frequency of this fractal is going to vary. What you can do is isolate it. So if we take that slope out of onto the third component again, and we'll just switch this to none, then we can see whether how it's spreading it and whether it's at a frequency where you can see the spread or not. Difficult to tell. Okay, so what you need to do is increase the transition. So if we use smooth clip, we can, and then really emphasize this transition between light and dark, we'll be able to see where this pattern is, and if it's occurring at such a frequency that we'll see it in the render on this material scale. So you can see it's blotchy. That's a good sign. So we might decide to lower that frequency now. So if we go to this, and I've got to do both of these, I suppose. We'll do a test here. So if I lower this frequency to a known value like 20, well, it's very difficult with this, and you can't enter the values directly, which is a shame. Come on, 20, just give me 20. Okay, I'll live with 19, because it's just getting difficult to maybe there's a key that allows you to move it slower. Okay, right, you can see now it's quite patchy on that surface, and we don't need to be absolutely precise about this. In some cases you do. Oops, I've gone into the wrong one. Slope. Okay, so move that back here, go into this. Now we're dealing with the slope one. If we roll it down to about 20, is there one of these that lets it move slower? Control? No, I'm just thinking of octane. Right, so have I got 20? There we go. Right, so now the transition is going to be at the frequency that I showed you, and then I can just change the effect here so that it's more spread out, and then it should give it more, it'll stick to the slopes, but it'll give it more of an organic transition across the surface of the material, and the whole aim of this is to make it look more natural. So let's apply a bit more sunlight to this scene. So let's take this up to 300. I should make where the sun's falling a bit more dramatic if it's landing on the scene, at least. So there's not much sun clipping that, so I'll move the sun round slightly more. Yeah, I can see a bit more of it, and then drop it back towards the horizon, so back in our sunset position, a bit higher than that. So that the sunlight's only falling on this very edge here. So, and to get more light there, I might have to move the HDRI around a bit to the left, so that brighter area is coinciding, and there's more light falling on the island there. So that's lit our material up a bit. We've still got this fading towards the ground. I've managed to scale the materials, it seems, more or less appropriately, and given that I've already been going at this about half an hour, I suppose at this point I'll just stop, let it render, and then we'll have a look at the final render when it's done. I'll just pause the video here. Inveterate tinkerer that I am, I decided to widen the field of view and change the aspect ratio a bit, just to change the composition, and it's moved the island slightly further away, but you can still see the overall effect of the materials and the lighting, and you can see a bit more of the sky, and there's quite a nice gradient. And as you can also see, it's just finishing off its anti-alias pass, so it didn't really take very long to render. So the next video then, what I'll do is I'll have a run through the rest of the files that are available in the Islands 2 product set, and we'll look at ways that you can utilize to save the materials, to save components from the materials, and save you skies, so that you can reuse these in your own scene. So it's essentially building up your own resource library, particularly with respect to materials and textures. I find this very useful, and often go through things that I've been making and save the textures so I can bring them in to other materials later on, and it's quite a handy little shortcut. So that's what we'll cover in the next video. I hope you enjoyed this video, by the way, and you'll go on to use these approaches in your own renders.